Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are jumping into another barrel-aged Imperial Stout. This time from Smog City Brewing Company. I've reviewed a lot of their beers, have had many of their stouts. They're big, bold. I expect this to be no different. And this is kind of continuing the trend of getting kind of the same beer, but with a few differences. So I got quite lucky with several of these from different brewers. This specific beer, I've got another version I think that has added coconut and vanilla, but still the same beer, still barrel-aged, all that good stuff. So yet again, it's going to give me another opportunity to compare and contrast how one or two minor tweaks to what you do with the beer can make a very big difference in the finished product. So this specific one is just the standard barrel-aged stout. It's called Inifinite Wishes. It clocks in at a very precise 13.47% ABV. It was bourbon barrel aged, and Smog City Brewing Company is based in Torrance, California. So starting with the label art. Label art on this, very clean design, just dark red with gold in this kind of fancy looking script. It looks quite nice. It is a limited release beer. They do wax dipped top, so we will take our pointy end of our bottle cap opener and score underneath as we always do. This one is not having a problem digging through that wax. Perfect. In fact, I'll probably be able to, get it right off. So, plenty of room for leverage. I'm just going to do a little wax cleanup. Make sure there's no little tiny bits that might drop into the beer glass. It's not the worst thing in the world if it does, but I prefer to not have it if I can avoid it. So, cracked bottle, poured right in the old stout glass here. Oop, this one's quite dark, quite thick. I'm going to glug it down the middle a little bit, give it a decent chance to make a head. There it goes. It's not going to have a problem. So we're going to slow it down just a tick. Let it do its thing. I can tell you it's quite active in terms of carbonation. I can see it rushing up on the side of the glass as I was pouring it. So, big aroma is already coming off of this one. Visually, it is pitch black, exactly as expected. Absolutely pitch black. Formed a lush, wonderful head here. It is pretty active in terms of carbonation, so I don't know how long that's going to actually stick around, but it did a great job in formation. Let's give it a sniff right over the glass. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of that bourbon barrel coming off of this one. That is the dominant aroma. You can smell the underpinnings of the roasty malt bill, but it is dominated by that barrel, and it smells absolutely fantastic. So I expect this is going to be another big beer, obviously just shy of 13.5% ABV. This is a big, big stout, barrel-aged at that. So this will be one of those long sippers. So without further ado, let's jump in and see what this first version of Inifinite Wishes is all about. Oh yeah. Oh, that's nice. Very, very roasty. Very prevalent with that bourbon. Very, very prevalent. There's a lot of caramel and toffee accents coming out of here. It's actually a lot of underlying coffee-like flavors coming through from this malt bill. It does put me in mind of some of those stouts where we talk about quite often, actually. The malt is roasted to such a degree that it starts to take on flavors like a French or Italian roast coffee bean, where it's roasted just to the edge of the smoke point and pulled right before it. That puts an absolute deep, deep level of roast and char into the flavor, and I absolutely love it. I think it goes great in a big, high ABV stout like this. So, flavor profile is massive. There's a lot of underlying kind of rich caramelized sugars. There's just big notes of char, big notes of roast, and of course this kind of coffee-like vibe coming off of it in tandem with the bourbon itself that tastes very much like classic bourbon. And it does kind of, this one doesn't put me in mind of too many vanilla overtones, but you can get some of the woodiness from that barrel and that added char that's kind of binding with this malt bill. It tastes absolutely fantastic. It's very big, it's very bold, it's very in your face, a very pungent flavor profile indeed. So, I wanted to kind of pay attention to what I was tasting on this one first. So we're going to jump back in, pick apart this body and mouthfeel, then we'll come back and talk about the finish. But my First impression, absolutely fantastic, truly delicious, and extremely well-balanced beer. Take two. Yeah, it's so good. So, the body on this, to me, really only feels medium, maybe bordering on medium heavy. It does not feel like a super heavy, oppressive, weighty beer. So maybe that's a positive in your book, but it definitely is not as heavy as I expect for nearly 13.5% ABV on this beer style. The mouthfeel, on the other hand, has an absolute boatload of resistance. I expected that because it looked quite thick pouring out of the bottle. Indeed it is. This is a very thick, viscous beer. Agitation on the palate really does make it even creamier, gives the sense of even greater thickness than it already has naturally. So a wonderful, lush, thick, resistant mouthfeel, just not as heavy as of a body as I expected. So everything I got in the first sip is just re-intensified on the second. Just this incredible wall and mixture of just deep, intense flavors kind of running in and out. On this one, I can tell you that flavor intensity curve is skewed maybe a little bit on the front end, and then it's a pretty quick ramp down in intensity before it starts to level off a little bit. So it's not quite at average normal shaped bell curve. And in terms of the finish on this one, it is really just on the high end of average. Considering the pungency of the flavor on this beer and the intensity with which those roasty edge malts and that kind of coffee-like underpinning from the malts is coming through, and the intensity of the barrel, I expected a very, very long finish on this one. This one, to me, really is just kind of high end of average. It's dissipated nearly already to next to nothing, and it hasn't even been a minute since I had that sip, I'm sure of it. So yeah, if you're looking for a beer that really lingers and coats the palate in a long-lasting flavor profile after each sip, this is not one like that. It's really just high end of average. I'm not saying it's below average. I'm just saying it's not absolute top tier in that respect. But it is what it is. What I can tell you is that this beer is absolutely delicious, and I am really looking forward to getting to try the other version of this beer just to compare and contrast, see what the deviations are outside of just the flavor profile. But my first impression, I absolutely love it. This is a big, big beer. It's crafted incredibly well. The balance is absolutely top tier, and I am a big, big fan of this one. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up my scores. When we come back, we'll get this one ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Smog City Brewing Company's Infinite Wishes, an Imperial Stout that clocks in at 13.47% ABV. It was bourbon barrel aged, and Smog City Brewing is based in Torrance, California. So to recap, this is one of two different versions of the same beer. This is the standard bourbon barrel aged version of this beer. I've got another one that's got some additives in it, so it's going to be pretty cool to get to kind of compare and contrast and see what deviations it makes in the final product. But nonetheless, let's get to the beer at hand. The aroma on this beer, as expected for a massively high ABV barrel-aged Imperial Stout, it was huge. The malt bill came through very clearly, very, very earthy, very roasty, and the bourbon really jumped right out at you. This was a very pungent, absolutely amazing aroma. The aroma does get a 10 out of 10. For the taste. Taste on this was fantastic. Really no tricks, no gimmicks. It's a bourbon barrel-aged Imperial Stout. So it was tons of deeply roasted malt, nice underpinning of char. There were some undercurrents of coffee-like flavors that came through as well, and the bourbon came through loudly and clearly. And then kind of a surprise, you don't always get it, but in this one there were tons of ribbons of caramel and toffee. It tasted fantastic. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body, this was one of the categories that surprised me a bit. The body did not feel anywhere near as heavy and weighty as you would expect for this beer style in this ABV range. It was really just high end of average. Body gets a 6 out of 10. For the mouthfeel was a different story. This felt extremely thick, extremely resistant. This one got very, very creamy when agitating around the palate. It felt exactly as I expected. Very lush. Mouthfeel gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish. The finish was the other category that surprised me a bit. As big and bold and pungent as these flavors were, how very present and forward they were, and this very high ABV, I expected the finish to be quite long indeed, with a lot of bitters, a lot of earthiness underneath, a lot of roasty kind of char qualities from that malt bill, and the bourbon barrel to kind of push it out even further than your average beer. This one really, for the style, for what it was, again, it was just high end of average. It did not last anywhere near as long as it expected. It wasn't bad, just high end of average. Finish gets a 6 out of 10. Head and retention, this one did an absolutely phenomenal job. Formed a very thick, nice creamy foamy head that stuck around almost the entire time. Head retention gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the appearance, this was textbook Imperial Stout, absolutely pitch black. Appearance gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was exquisite. And really something like this comes down to the type of barrel, the amount of time that you leave it in the barrel, and the intricate complexities of the various malts that you use, how deeply they're roasted, how many in tandem with the yeast strain. So all of these played together to make an absolutely picture-perfect Imperial Stout, with this bourbon barrel being the added bonus on top. Everything worked in concert. It all had its own voice. The intermingling of these different flavors was absolutely fantastic. The balance gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling of the intangible? Subjectively, I absolutely loved it. Just another in a long line of stellar barrel-aged stouts. This one gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Finally is an example of this style. So overall, this beer did exceptionally well. It lost some points in finish by not meeting my expectation. It lost some points in body by not meeting my expectation. But if we're going to take body and finish as benchmarks for what really is what a style is about, then we're looking in the wrong places. Everything else about this beer was absolutely top tier. A couple deviations, but it's nothing that really deters from the heart of what the style is and the style is about. I give it perfect marks. Example of the style gets a perfect 10 out of 10, which does bring the total score on Smog City Brewing Company's Inifinite Wishes to a 92 out of 100. This is top tier Imperial Stout, guys. This was a big, big, big beer. If you're into big, very flavor forward, roasty stouts with very earthy and roasty underpinnings, and also like barrel aged, this is one to put on your radar. I got this from Tavour, as I get a majority of my beers, and they had multiple different versions. This one was absolutely fantastic. Really got me prepared and excited to taste the second version of this beer, which we will be doing in the coming reviews. But this one, I highly recommend. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep your beer, keep your craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.